We'll hope that this week actually records properly. So just to reiterate for the recording, so Passport is the most popular authentication package that is in Node. It's used all over, and it has a bunch of what are called strategies. So you can see strategies in the left hand right here. So the thing that, and this is why I said that we're going to be installing 4 different packages, is I believe I mentioned either in the first or second week that the Node ecosystem is always about just doing one thing and trying to do that one thing very well. So what Passport has is kind of like a plug-in system that allows you to integrate different strategies into it. So I'm sure you guys know, like a typical login for a website is either like an email or password, or sometimes a username and password. However, you look at other sites that integrate, login with Facebook, login with GitHub, login with Twitter. Those are other ways of authenticating on a website. And Passport gives us the ability to really easily integrate with these third parties. So if we go under strategies, we can see they have 5 featured ones right here. They have Passport Facebook, Passport Google Auth, Passport HTTP Bearer, Passport Twitter, and Passport Zero Auth. The one that we're actually going to be using, which you can see is the one with the most downloads, is this Passport Local. So next week we will be going over using a third-party service, but for this week we're just going to be using a username and password and storing that information in our database. Does anyone want to tell me why it might be a good idea, especially very early on, to use a third-party service for authentication? Just take a guess. Yeah, sure.
Because nowadays people create accounts that are not actually real. Like, I don't know how to call it.
Like bot accounts.
Yeah, bot.
Yeah. So that is one thing. So when you end up having your own authentication service, you have to put in your own protections for bots. Yeah, that's one thing. The other thing is I mean, we're in college. We don't have 20 years experience in security. We don't always have the best knowledge of security practices. So when we end up rolling our own authentication system, that can start to come into security issues. So if we're not properly sanitizing inputs, if we're not hashing passwords correctly, if they're too easy to guess, or maybe we do some bad practices, that is a main issue of being able to log into an application. Whereas when we go with like something like Passport Facebook or Passport Twitter, what ends up happening is all of that authentication is offloaded to that service. So we don't actually care about what the password is. We pass it off to Facebook, and then Facebook comes back to us, and we know that it's Facebook because we end up having a callback that will let us know that, yeah, everything's all good. Here's some like information that we're cool to share with you. So that's what's really nice, is we don't have to worry about doing any sort of like password comparisons. The only thing is it makes it a little bit more complex of making sure once that password is correct that it comes back to us. That's the only thing that we have to set up ourselves. But for today, just because it is a little bit simpler at first, we're going to be using Passport Local. So yeah, so that is the one package that well, 2 packages. We're going to be using Passport and Passport Local. The other thing that we're going to be using is Passport is only for logging in. So as soon as we log in, that's it. Like, that's Passport has done its job. However, what we're also going to be using is what is called express session. So a session is where it keeps in memory what you're, like when you're logged in or not logged in. So obviously if we go to a Facebook page, we refresh, we want to still be logged in when we hard refresh the application. So that's what this is designed for, is being able to handle your session management. It has a couple different ways that it can handle it. We're going to be using cookies automatically. But this is a very quick thing to set up. So that'll be the first thing that we set up right now. So if you go to your project that hopefully you have already copied, I'm going to clone it down to my computer. So let me boost up this size. So I'm going to go to my documents, Georgian College, and Tuesday, and I will git clone down my repo. And if I ls, I can see it right there. COMP2068, S2019, week 7, Tuesday. And because when we push up our code to GitHub, we don't have any of our node modules. Right now, if I typed in npm run dev, I will get an error saying that it can't find HTTP errors. That is not an HTTP error that you are getting. It's just you don't have any of your dependencies installed in your application. So you can just type npm install, and then you can run npm run dev. And you can see that it's working just fine. So again, if it's not working, just npm install. And then npm run dev. If you're getting any issues with connecting to MongoDB, please make sure that your network settings and your user settings are configured in Mongo Atlas. I started now just not doing a temporary account, or at least extending from 6 hours for my temporary account. So yeah, sorry, I don't know where I was going with that. So as I mentioned, Express Session is going to be the first thing that we install into our application. So in order to do that, we will type in npm install -- save express session. And you'll see the NodeMon just restarted right there. And I will open this in my terminal, or in my code editor. So right here, I have my application. You can see right here is our dependency of Express Session. And everything else is good to go. We have our project model from last week. This week, we're going to have to create another model, which is going to be our account or our user model, so that way someone can log into our application. But we don't have to worry about that right this second, because we're just going to be using our Express Session in our application. So if you are at this point, you have Express Session installed, you have your node modules, and your application is working without crashing in your terminal, that is good. If not, try to follow along, and then I'll try to help you on the break if you are either falling behind or if there's some sort of error that you're getting. I'll try to help you on the break. So let me bump up the font size just so it's a little bit easier to see at the back. So if we open up our app.js, again, this is where the majority of the logic of shared stuff in our application is going to lie. So obviously app standing for application. So in this case, we want to have, is that a question? Yes.
Sorry, can you just go back really quickly to what you ran?
What was I on, sorry? Like the package?
Yeah, in the terminal.
Oh, yep.
Where is it?
Which one?
The latest one.
Right here on the right side. So that's the npm install -- save express session. No worries. So in our app.js, this is where we're going to require in our express session that we just installed. So it doesn't really matter where. It's always good to try to keep as many of your requires at the top as possible, so that way you can organize your folder a little bit easier. So I'm going to require in express, or I'm just going to call it session. So const session equals require express session. And again, the name that is in here is always the name that's going to be under your package JSON. So if you end up forgetting, it's what you just installed that's right here. So it's require express session. And if I open up Google Chrome and go to our application, which again is localhost 3000, right now we don't have very much going on. I have a thing saying here that I made a change to the homepage. Welcome to Express, which is the default that comes with it. I am going to, during this class, we're going to be installing Bootstrap into our application, not through NPM, but just using the cloud. There are cloud links that are available because we're going to be cloning this repository from week to week. So before, we've had some pretty ugly layouts that we've been working with. Everyone, please welcome Vlad to class.
Hello,
Give him a little... You're welcome. So if we go into Bootstrap, or again, if you don't want to do this, just feel free to download my code or just copy it on GitHub. The only things that we need right here is the CSS link and the JavaScript link. And that is not wanting to do it. So I'll just go into documentation right here. Okay, so, and I'm going to be just going over adding Bootstrap very quickly just because it is not an important part of writing our application today. I just want to make sure that when we start doing stuff that we don't have to go back and do it. So I'm just requiring in a link in our layout file, and I am replacing the tags with parentheses to match our style sheet right here. We can actually just comment out that style sheet. It's not needed. And the other thing that I need is the JavaScript that's down here. So we have our script right here. Another script here. And save that. So now if I restart this right here, you'll see that it's using Bootstrap. I can test that just by throwing my block container or block content into a container like this. So I can see that Bootstrap's class is working properly, so that's good. But going back to where we were, just to catch you up, Vlad, we just copied our project from last week and we've installed Express Session. You could probably just copy off your neighbor if you just need to catch up. I'll also be posting the code on GitHub in a couple minutes as well. So once we've installed Express Session into our app, further down, what we want to do is, because a session we want it to be active on every single page, we want to make sure, and also just for explanation, Express Session is a middleware. So like all of these other app.uses, these are all different middlewares that are in our application. So we have logger.dev, or logger, which is in dev. What this basically means is when we're running in development mode, it will automatically log stuff to our console for us. So on every single hit, that's why when we're running our terminal here, we can see we did a get /200. This is meaning that we loaded our index page as a get request. We got a 200 status code, and it took 264 milliseconds to load that index page. And then you can see here we have our style sheets. It loaded style sheets, style CSS. That took 4.7 milliseconds, et cetera, et cetera. If we don't want to display that anymore, we can actually just comment it out. And you'll see if we refresh our application now, we no longer get any of those logging. And that's because the middleware will automatically do that for us. And just like that middleware, we want a middleware for our session management. So in this case, we're going to use app.use. We have session, and that is a function that you give an object. So there's some important key values that we end up giving to session. I'm going to be telling you what they are, but of course, if you do not know what they are, again, you can always look at the documentation that is on NPM or on GitHub. So where is it? Right here. They have an example. If you scroll down, you can see right here that they have a secret. They have this value called resave and this value called save uninitialized. This cookie part is not as important. The reason why this would normally be used is when we throw it up on a server, we want to always serve our pages from HTTPS when we're doing some sort of login. And this, what it ends up doing is enforcing that cookies are only saved when using HTTPS. But because we're running this locally on our machine, we can just skip that and only grab these 3 values. So secret, resave, and save uninitialized. So I'll copy those in. You can keep resave as false and save uninitialized as true. And the secret is, all it's used is for the hashing algorithm. You can set this to being whatever you want. So I'm just going to throw in some sort of like gibberish. It can be as long or as short as you want. It's usually always recommended to have a long, complex secret. But I mean, once I push this up to GitHub in an open source thing, someone's going to see what the secret is anyway, so it's kind of redundant. But yeah, so I'm just going to put it in anyway. But now, so I'll just throw a comment right here. So express session for persistent authentication. And that is it for express session. It's very quick to set up. It's only, I mean, I don't know if you really count this as, I count this as one line because it's just one function call of app.use. But it's, if you consider this one line, it's 2 lines. You require it into your application, and then you end up using it as a middleware. That's it. Again, as mentioned, please make sure that it is above your routers that are right here, because we want to make sure that it is always working on every page that we hit. So you can see if it is working by creating another middleware. And what that is going to do is we're just going to log out request.session. So request.session, or I'm going to throw it actually right below our session because otherwise it will not be created. But what we can do is we can end up logging out what that session is. And one other thing that I messed up is please make sure that you throw in next into this middleware that we're using right here. Otherwise it will not hit any of the next pages. So if we console log out request.session, and then we use next to go to whatever page that we're wanting to go to, and I refresh this. If I open up my terminal, you can see right here that we have session. It has a cookie, a path. It also has some other stuff as well, expires, original max age, and HTTP only. So HTTP only is true, meaning that it will only be served on HTTP requests. So this right here is a good sign that you have properly implemented express session into the application that we're creating. So I'm going to take that time to commit this to GitHub. So implement express session and push that up. Okay, so now GitHub starts telling me messages about there being vulnerabilities and pushes, so that's cool, I guess. Just to let you know, don't be worried about the vulnerabilities that show up on GitHub in the automated emails. It's not really a big deal. I mean, like at the end of the day, we're just learning, but it's because of probably dependencies that we have. So don't worry about it, but if you want to talk to me after the break, just because you're curious, feel free to do so. But yeah, so express session is, as I mentioned, this is the easier part to set up. The next part that we have to set up is the logic for being able to actually log into our application. So this requires a lot more setup. We're going to be using 3 different packages, which is going to be passport, passport local, and also passport local. Does it show up here? No, it doesn't. Passport local mongoose. So passport local mongoose, because we're already using mongoose in our application, this kind of helps us out with that. And they give you a On this one specifically, they give you a handy command that you can just copy paste into your terminal that will give you everything that you need. So in this case, it will install Passport, it'll install Passport local, and it will install Passport local Mongoose as well as Mongoose right here. So there's 4 different things that will install for us. We already have Mongoose in our application. We can ignore it, but because if we type install, it'll automatically recognize that we have it. So it will not do it for us. So if I open up my terminal, I copy paste that command that's in there and hit enter. Installed those 4 packages pretty quickly. So we have our Passport local, local Mongoose, Passport, and then Mongoose. So I'll just leave that up on the board just for people to copy in. If you want to do it singly, you're welcome to do so as well. You can just do it one by one. But sometimes writing it all on one line can just be a little bit quicker. Yep. Yes. Yeah, I was recording last class too, and then it crapped out, so I'll hope that this one gets posted properly. So again, you can double check that your package is installed correctly by checking your package.json folder. What changed here? Oh, okay. So if you check your package.json, you should have your Passport, Passport local, and Passport local Mongoose, all 3 of them right here. And in order to implement those, we have a couple different things that we have to do. So we're going to have to create a model, so that way we can model out our user. So I'm going to create a file called user.js under our models. And this is going to be created almost in the same way as we do with any other model that we've created in this class, but it will be a little bit different because we will use a plugin, but we will do that after the fact. So we will require in Mongoose by using const mongoose equals require mongoose. We will do const schema equals mongoose.schema. Const user schema equals new schema. And const user equals mongoose.model user schema. And then we can just do module.exports equals user. So to keep our user schema pretty basic, the only things that we're going to be including into our schema is just going to be a username and a password field. We're not going to include anything else, no sort of like information, just to make it as easy as possible. So we'll have a username, which is a string, and a password, which is a string. That's it. So once we've created our schema, the only other thing that we have to do is use our passport local mongoose inside of our schema here. So if we open up our, where is it, right here? No. So right here in their documentation, you can see that we just require in our passport local mongoose into the same folder that we've created our schema. And then we end up using what is called plugin, which comes to us when we create our schema in Mongoose. So I can just copy paste this in. So passport local mongoose and user schema dot plugin. Other schemas that we've created before. This is the first time that we're using a plugin in our Mongoose schema. So the reason why we end up using a plugin is that passport local mongoose gives us some handy functions that we can end up doing. Because when we create a model, it will automatically create that, like find by ID, find and update, all that sort of stuff. And what passport local mongoose does is it does the same thing and gives us some extra functionality as well. So it gives us a .register function that we can call from our model, so that way we can end up registering a user, which normally you would say is the same thing as creating a user, but it has some extra functionality behind the scenes that ends up happening. Okay. How's everyone doing for copying this off the board? Good? Just leave it up for maybe 10 more seconds or so, maybe 15. So this is now one of 3 things that we have to implement into our application. So we've created our model. Now, the rest of what we have to do is 2 different things. In our application, we have to register our model and register passport in our application. So that way, on any single route that we're using, passport is already all registered up, and we can end up using local authentication, or in next week's class, we can end up using GitHub authentication. And in fact, you can use multiple authentication methods at the same time. So that's what I'll do now. Is that okay, Vlad? Cool. So under app.js, at the top, like we installed our Express session, we're going to require in 2 different parts. We're going to require in our model that we just created in our models folder. So I will require in const user equals require models user. So that's the one that we have to do. And then the second one, and again, it doesn't matter which order you put this in, but is requiring in passport. So const passport equals require passport. Actually, I lied. There's a third one that we'll have to do, but we'll do that in a second. The other one that we have to require in is that LocalStrategy that we had installed earlier, which is passport local. So under passport, I'll say const LocalStrategy equals require passport local dot strategy. Oops, sorry.
Can you just scroll down a bit?
Yeah, what do you need?
I want to see what you did for the app.use for creating the session.
Yep, right here.
Request check. Got it.
So I threw that just before, or just after our express static and above our routes right here. This part you don't have to include. Was just purely just to see that request session was working as expected. So we can actually just remove that. So, and I've mentioned this before from class to class, but the order in which we register our middlewares is incredibly important. The reason for this is if I registered session after our routers, if we ended up hitting the index page, it would never hit our router. Or sorry, if we hit our index page, it would never end up hitting our session middleware. But the other thing is when we use Passport, we have to initialize Passport after our session because we end up using Passport in conjunction with session. So if we go to the documentation for Passport.js, most of this is just showing how to do different parts of it. This part we don't need, not yet anyway. Okay. So this is the part where they have it here. So the two things that we need is this passport.initialize and passport.session. And that passport.session is saying that we're going to be using express session with Passport. So both of these have to be used after our session right there. So we have passport or app.use passport initialize and passport or app.use passport session. So we can initialize or save that. And if we open up our terminal, our application is still running. We don't have any errors, so that is good. So I'll just throw some comments, although this is kind of obvious. Initialize passport first, then use passport with session. So now that we've initialized passport and saying that we're using it with session, the next part that we have to do is we have to register our local strategy. And again, this is so that anywhere in our application is able to know that we have this local strategy that we created. Where is it? Which under username and password under documentation, it shows you how to do it. Actually, I think their documentation is slightly whack. Yeah, where is it in here? Yeah, so this is actually the part that is more useful, is right here. We use passport.use new local strategy user.authenticate, and then we also end up doing this serialize and deserialize user. So that way, well, it has a comment right here. So use static serialize and deserialize a model for passport session support. So that way it can end up passing that information through our session. So I'm just going to copy what's there. I know sometimes I say in class, do not just copy stuff online, but really, at the end of the day, like, because we're using third-party modules in order to do this parts of our code, there's a lot of what normally, like, we're not rolling our own passport and we're not rolling our own session. So some of those steps that you would end up learning by building it your own, we're not doing that because honestly, it takes too much time. Like, I could probably do like authentication for like 4 or 5 weeks if we were doing it all ourselves. When you guys did ASP.NET, what did you guys use for authentication? Was that like, was it Orin or Orion or something like that? Isn't it like a person's name? I can't remember. But even probably in that class, you guys didn't end up writing your own. No. I think the smallest that they do is in PHP. You end up doing it, like you'll do like a small hash algorithm with maybe salt. We didn't even do salt in our class. They were just like plain text all the way. Who cares? So this is everything that we have to set up for using Passport throughout our application. The only other thing that we also have to do is handling the login and register routes, so that way we can register new users in our application and be able to log in with those users. So this should be all set up properly. If I open up, looks good. So I'm going to create a different route for all of our authentication, just because I don't want to put it in the same route as our index file, just because it's very specific stuff to authentication. So I'm going to create a auth.js file, and everything that's going to be in here is for logging in. So it'll either be rendering the form for logging in, handling the post request for logging in, rendering the register form, handling the post for the register form, and being able to log out. Those are the 5 things that will be handled in here. So I'll just throw those as comments. I think you guys seemed to like that last week when I had just kind of put in everything that we'll be doing in this file at the beginning. So I'll just throw that in right now. Actually, I'll do that after I do the basics of what we have to do in every route, because it'll probably take you guys longer to copy it down. So we need to require an express. We need to create a router based off of express.router. And then we need to module.exports our router object. So those are the 3 things that we need. So I'll start putting those comments in. So the first one that we need is render login form. Second one is handle login form submission. We need to render our register form and handle register form submission. And lastly, 5, logout. So for anyone who's been working on their assignments, or maybe you've even done some Node stuff by yourself, has anyone ever tried to access the same variable on multiple view files? So inside of your index file, maybe your users file, or anything else like that, sometimes there's information that you want to share between views. And if you haven't run into that, a very good example of wanting to access the same information in every single page that is rendered on your application is knowing if a user is logged in or not, if they're authenticated. And the reason for that is we end up sometimes changing what our interface looks like if someone is logged in versus not. And an example of that is we don't want to display a nav link to log in if someone is already logged in our application. That doesn't make sense. So we'll also be going over how to pass a variable to every single page that we have in our application. I just wanted to let you guys know that, just because it's sometimes good to know what we're doing. So still have 15 minutes until we'll go for a break. So right now we'll just work on, I'm going to do the inverse. Usually I'll try to render the form first and then handle the submission. But today I'm actually going to be doing the submission part first, and then we'll test it with Postman. So for our route, router.get, we are going to be handling our login at /login. And actually, I don't do that part yet. The thing that we actually do inside of our login is instead of doing the regular middleware that we always do with request and response, this is where we end up actually using that passport that we registered in our app. So if we require in passport at the top, inside of our login page, we can end up using passport.authenticate. No, that doesn't seem right. Is it passport authenticate? You'd swear that I did not do this yesterday. Yeah, it is authenticate. Okay. So we end up using passport.authenticate, and then we give it local. And this is saying that we're going to be using that LocalStrategy that we had registered inside of app.js. And then it also accepts a second parameter of options. And this is where we can actually do some really easy stuff without having to write any sort of code for it. So you're working on a website, you have a login form, and someone tries to log in, but it doesn't work. What do you usually do? Someone want to answer that?
Display an error.
Yeah. And the reason what you end up doing is you end up redirecting them back to the login page, right? So you end up redirecting them back to the login page and usually display some sort of message. And one way or one thing that they end up calling it in Node is what is called a flash message. And what a flash message is it's a one-time message. It is generated, and then the moment that you call it as a function, it wipes it out of memory. So it doesn't exist anymore. So that way you don't end up passing several messages to the user that they've already seen but isn't relevant anymore. So, but we're not going to worry so much about the flash message part as it is the redirection part. So one option that we have is this failure redirect. And on that, it just accepts a path. So on failure redirect, we want to redirect to /login. And then the other thing that we want to do is on a successful login, we're just going to redirect them back to the index page. So same thing, success. Oh, sorry, I need a comma. Success, redirect, and that will just be a slash. So this is all we need to handle our login. Is on failure, we redirect to the login page, and on success, we just send them to the index page. So in order to test this, I will, actually, sorry. We don't actually have a login page set up. So we'll get, we can end up seeing that it fails because we'll get a 404 if we get rendered to the login page. And if we get a 200 on the home page, then we know that the login worked correctly. So I'm going to open up Postman. I'm still running my application here. And I'll just put them side by side so we can see it. And I'll just do a new request. What is going on? I will just close it and reopen it. I think it effed up. There we go. Okay. So I already had this set up from yesterday. I have a post request with a username and a password. And a user that I had set up yesterday is with the username of example and the password 123456. So if I log in with just the password 123 and I click send, you'll see that I end up getting a 404 request right here. And you can see that inside of our terminal where it's saying post to /login 404. But if I end up changing this to 456 and click send, we still get a 404. What's this showing? 404 not found. Oh, okay. So never mind. I forgot to use the route that we just actually created. So in order to use it, like we have in other things inside of our app.js, app.js, route /auth. And then to give it a higher priority over our index page, right here I'll put it above our index. But I still want to use the index page for our auth router. With nothing, we still get a 404, which I'm assuming is correct. But if I do 456 and click send, I still get a 404. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm stupid. I did router.get inside of our auth. Very silly mistakes. So I'll test this one more time. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So this is now properly happening. So you can see as I do a post request that we have that post to /login and we get a 302. So a 302 is what is called a temporary redirect. You can always look up status codes to see what those are, but there's a 302 and a 301. So a 302 just means it's a temporary redirect. We don't know if it's always going to redirect like this, whereas a 301 redirect will end up being cached by your browser and will automatically handle that in the future. So we end up redirecting to the login page and we get a 404. So that means that it was unsuccessful at logging in. If I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it does a post request. We still get a 302 because we're redirecting, but now we're redirected to the index page and we get a 200 status code. So that means that we're actually now logged into the application. So that's good. So that means that login is working. If we wanted to actually set this up with a form, we still have some time to do that. We'll just do something kind of basic right now. So we'll do router.get at /login. And all this is going to do is do request, response, and it will res.render our login page, which we have not created. So inside of your application, unless if you're using my credentials for Mongo Atlas, you actually will not have any users in your database, so you won't be able to log in with anyone. But that's probably a good thing to test, because if you somehow manage to be able to log in, something's not working. So if we just throw in our login form, or like our rendering our login, we can create a new view file under our views folder called login.pug. And this is where our form will be. So it's going to extend layout. We'll do block content and just an H1 that says login form. So again, we'll create it under our views folder called login.pug, because that's what I'm using under our auth route. And then I just threw in extends layout, block content, and then an H1 for our login form. So you can test that that is working by going to localhost 3000/login, and you should get rendered on your page is an H1 just saying login form. Hopefully you are not getting something that looks like this, which this will be a 404 page. Make sure that all of your spelling is done correctly and that you have used your route inside of your app.js file. But we have our login form coming up, so I'm going to throw this in a container. So I have a container with login form, and I will create a form that will just have two fields. We'll just have the username, and we'll have a password. So form with a method of post. We'll have a form group with a label that says username and a input of form control, name equals username, placeholder, we're not going to bother. I think that should be it for that. We'll have a type of password. By default, if you do not put in a type for an input, it is always assumed that it's going to be a text. Although it is good to just put it in for sometimes accessibility. You're explicitly saying that this input is going to be a text, whereas some other times it might try to infer that it's something else based off of the name or something like that. So yeah, so for best practices, it is always good to put in the type. And then lastly, we need to create a button. So I'll use button primary with a type of submit that says login. Just to make sure that I don't have my weeks messed up. This isn't like the last week before reading week, is it?
Yep. Yes,
Next week is reading week?
yep.
Oh, I think I have this all messed up. Okay. I had like students emailing me going like, I can't make the midterm. And I'm like, well, wouldn't that not be until next week? I didn't realize that this, okay. I'm off by an entire week. So, cool. Okay, well, we gotta go quick, so type fast. Anyway, so so if I re-render my form, I have my username and password. So I'll put in example as the username and the password of 123456. If I click log, or actually I'll do it again without the 6. So it's 12345. If I click login, it should redirect back to the login form. So that means that it's not working correctly. Well, sorry, it is working correctly, but we didn't use the correct name. We see our 302 redirect right there. And if I do example with password 123456 and click login, we get redirected to our login page. And this means that we're now authenticated. So 7 o'clock, we'll take a 15-minute break. Yep.
Just, you know,
Okay, I'll help you on the break. So we'll take a 15-minute break. I'll walk around, help any people that have some issues. I'll also push my code up onto GitHub just before you guys go. So there. So if you just want to be here 7:15, and then we'll continue from there. So really, next week is reading week?
Yes.
I think I have it backward. Like, huh.
I think you're on the assignment extension. I think you're on the assignment extension or something. I suppose.
Hold on, let me open up the syllabus. I might have just like done the syllabus without actually checking when reading week is, which is probably not good to do. So this is the Monday class syllabus. Today is June 18th. Oh. Oh, okay. I did have it like that. Okay, so we are doing authentication part 2. I was like, so last semester, because of the holiday, we were able to do authentication part 1 and 2 before reading week. So I'm kind of thrown off, whereas authentication part 2 will be done after reading week. So, which is actually kind of good, because we'll do like a little bit of recap as you guys come back after all your hard studying that you guys will be doing over the next week, I'm sure. But no, there will not be an extension on the assignment. So I'm sorry. I did say that you guys could get as much done as you wanted, but again, this is as mentioned before in class, like assignment 1 is pretty much exactly like lab 2. There's just more files that you have to create. So feel free to look at lab 2 if you need a reference. So I was just gonna help. Oh, yep. Yes, assignment part 2 is due. So no, that is right before reading.
It was like
That's
a
what you
calculator.
No,
It was like
I'm sorry. Okay, so it will be due Monday at midnight. Monday being the first day. Of
Yeah,
reading.
it's like mine's.
So you don't have classes. Oh yeah. It's the exact same requirements. Like it's the same file. I will put a submission link up though, so that way you can actually submit it.
So you know, no problem. Local coffee shop. A bit too Take you to a coffee shop and I'll get you
So the reason
yeah.
so we do slash like right now
Yeah, like, it was like saying it's probably because of this guy. These 2, 3 people like from each group that we and not like especially when you're people.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, no, 3 is a lot.
So
Yeah.
whatever the secret would say, but it's not the definition. Yeah, I'm sure they are up to 6. Or there might be a I'll get back to that.
Anything so
So he's asking 7,700.
oh, okay.
Just
Something
No, I can't. Yeah.
I remember
He's gonna go. Yeah.
Okay, so having, not a problem, but I was trying to figure out the project.
Yeah, let's take a look.
I was trying to do routing, like, it
So
wasn't
they're
fine,
not just gonna
like,
find
I had a
they're gonna
folder,
fix what the
and then I
problem
found
is.
a folder, and I clicked on the link, it went to that folder, but it wasn't rendering
The latest.
file, so I wondered if I did it,
The latest.
I don't know, perhaps, so there's,
So.
unfortunately, a
and I
couple
told
different ways
myself,
that works.
so that after you use the string of so when we just slash, we say anyone who's using writer.get/login, but if we put off in the string, if we don't put that in there, just have a slash, it'll do a slash login. So it does relative mapping also when we're trying to render a file, it will automatically drive the use folder. So you see like res.render login, that will render login.pub. But if you do off/login, it will look for a folder called off and then try to render login.
Okay, I'm gonna maybe ask you for help again with this.
If you spend like the next little bit, if you open up your assignment and I try to take a look at it,
I'm gonna try to fix it. Application.
Yep. Yep, can you scroll up just so I can see? Cannot find module expressjs. So you have to npm install. Can you open up your package JSON folder?
Letter receipts and all that.
So you have express section. Oh, did you clone this off the? Can you? Here, let's just go to that.
The guy that drove me down, he wouldn't let me give him any answer.
There we go.
He like,
Can you type in
like
npm space
kind of feel it's fine.
so that will install and hopefully that will fix
$50
it.
and he went to throw it out the window. The only reason they didn't throw it out the window is because when you threw it, the wind blew it back.
So it looks like you're having a mission
I had to go and picking it up on the ground as well. Just
EPERM operation not committed. I'm not sure about this one. This one just looks like it's a permissions issue. Can you try running this off of like maybe your C drive instead of your E drive? Because it's saying something about your E drive and it's not liking that. So I don't know.
Copy these.
Yes. I will also do one sec. I just have to run to the back. Okay.
I'll load it up. So it was like I was playing around with this and I couldn't get it, so I just stopped doing it. But so I've got the two links there. So this is the so so I've got one, two, partial to that, right? So if I click on this about page, it doesn't find it, but I have the partial page, and I just did like this, just to get
Okay. And following, I wonder if partials is a protected URL. Can you remove about out of that partials?
that you probably actually if I go partials here, no, or yeah, partial slash. And I do like that.
No such file directory, looking under. Okay, so that's good. So now
It's probably because I did this. Does it do that?
it needs it if it's a little folder.
Yeah.
So the idea of partials is actually, you remember how
Like a nav bar or footer or
Yes,
something like that? It's not
exactly.
actually like.
Yeah, so it's an incomplete part of HTML.
Sure. So what happens if I do this and I go back to, if I moved it out of the about page, do I just go back?
Yeah.
Okay.
So now you save that and you just remove.
So I go here and then I walk through the
That won't work because you have it, if you use a slash partial slash about,
Okay.
you want to just write like a slash.
Okay. So if I go back to have that JS, because where did I have it? That has nothing to do with it.
You're not specifying where on your file system it is, which you'll probably you're specifying what the
So what it's gonna put in the URL basically is what you're saying, right? Okay, so you can put something in the URL that is different. Ah,
Yes.
because I was wondering, I was like, oh,
But the
like,
reason why we typically have the same route name as the pug name is so that way you can do it one-to-one and be like, I know this is for that.
yeah, that would be super confusing for you back and forth.
Exactly, so if you just started naming stuff willy-nilly, it can be confusing, but when we start having like multiple files, like slash about, that hits the about route, and then that about route renders the about file, and you're like, well, what is it doing? Is it hitting about.pub, or is it hitting about.index?
Yeah.
And it's about.index like this.
Okay.
So you can think of it like those, the JavaScript files, where you're doing router.get and router.post, is where the server is deciding based on the URL, which file size. So given this path name, I want to render this file.
You saying like what it displays in the URL and actually what we're getting makes like a lot of sense because now I understand what's going on. Now I understand what's happening. So,
Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay,
It's probably not
so
it's just
right
like
here, you have just one.
No, I think mine has to pull routes. And I'm wondering if that's.
So you might have your username and password incorrectly entered. Hi.
Yep, okay.
Yes.
That's what goes. All the other plates.
There's no mention. No mention. Everything is private. So assignment one is the thing that's due.
way back in the history right now.
Yeah, that's part of why I do. 2019 goes 26 years old.
Yes.
and,
Yeah. Yeah, I always have to learn a lot of students that think that there's a midterm because I'm sure every other class had midterms, but we do not have it in here, so like.
So recently we discovered that is, so my sister's 17 years old. Yeah, so like I can tell me about other teenage friends and start doing all these.
So assignment 2 is due next, like this upcoming. Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, it's 10 years apart.
Yes, part 2 of assignment 1 is due this upcoming.
You can say like that, but like I'm just turning on these stuff that
It's the same reward. So yeah, so part 1 is only a partial part of it, Whereas if you look at the document, the only thing that was required was 4 GitHub commits
That's it.
and the cloud. Everything else that is in there is also part of it. So having like the services page, the products page, the homes page, the contact page, that's all for part 2.
Generational cohorts.
So if you've already done that, you've already finished it, you don't have to worry, just resubmit it for part 2. Have you already done it?
Yes.
Okay, so you can just resubmit.
Yeah. I'm not saying that.
I haven't posted the link on Blackboard yet for the submission for part 2. This goes to everyone. I will be putting that up for part 2, just to let you know, but it's not up yet. Yes?
Could you help me making these standards?
Yeah.
So yeah, first of all, I'm probably missing something that is wrong with the password.
Yes, you are not, okay, so you have password there, scroll down.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in all of them.
Yeah, so go into, yep, so you're not requiring it up at the top. So you do the same thing, so prompts, passport. Yeah, you can do that. Getting there, there.
Before the post
So this one on the right. So you actually muck this up a little bit. Passport authenticate local is supposed to be down there. That's why.
inside the router post?
Yes. So I'll open it up on my screen just so you can see it.
Yeah. And then GitHub though?
Sorry?
Is it on GitHub?
It should be on, it's on GitHub, but it's also right here on my screen.
Okay.
So you can see the GET request is only doing the request response res.render,
Mhm.
and then the render.post is using the passport authenticate local with the options. Was that a question back there or stretch? Question? Okay.
This will be the last question I have to Yep, so you copy that in, but you see how it has, like it says here, replace less than password greater than with the password that you entered in. Yes, so you have to replace the symbol as well. And did you have a period as part of your password? Okay. So try canceling that and restarting it.
Please don't play around.
And have you set up your network? Can you just go to network access? Click add IP address in the top right, and just click allow access from network. And then click confirm. And now restart. Your data browser. Yep. No, okay. So I will have to go, I'll try to help you with that later, if that's okay.
All right. So before we went on break, we managed to log into our application, but we have no visual way right now of knowing that we are authenticated or if we are not authenticated in our application. So what I'm going to do as a part of our layout file is I'm just going to render to the screen if we're logged in or not. It's the easiest way as of right now of knowing if we're logged in or not. So inside of our layout.pug file, I'm going to create an h1 that says currently authenticated, and this will be rendered from a variable called is authenticated. So just in our h1 or in our layout.pug file, just below the body, we'll do an h1 says currently authenticated, and that will render this variable. If I refresh, you'll see right now that it's not rendering anything. And the reason is authenticated is currently null, and null is obviously nothing, so it's going to render nothing. But what we need to do is make sure that on every single page request that we end up passing that. So after our session, after our passport session here, I am going to create a middleware, kind of similar to what I did before when I was logging out request.session, but we're going to be setting up that variable. So we need request, response, and next. And in order to pass a variable to every single thing, right now when we pass variables to a view, we use res.render. And that means that for the response, we're going to render this page, pass these variables. But what we need to do is we use res.locals, and that means that we're going to pass that to every single response. So we can use res.locals.isAuthenticated, and that is going to equal, and what's nice is, and truth be told, I can't remember if it's coming from session or passport, but one of them will give us a function that is called, that's all we need to do to get that isAuthenticated variable inside of our layout.pug. So you'll see right now we have isAuthenticated false. If I go to /login, it's still false. I type in example 12345, it's false. I type in example 123456, I click login, and we're now authenticated in our application. And if I refresh the page, we are still authenticated. I can go to the login page still, we're still authenticated. However, you might notice something as you continue to work in your application once you've logged in. As soon as I make a file change, which in this case, I'm just going to manually restart NodeMon. So as soon as NodeMon restarts and I refresh, we get unauthenticated. And the reason for that is the node process that our server is running on keeps all of the sessions in memory. As soon as a file changes and it kills that node process and restarts the server for us, all of those sessions are no longer valid. Like it doesn't know what exists. So there are other services that we will end up using. So we can actually use MongoDB to handle all of our sessions. But for right now, we're just going to deal with the struggles of every time we make a file change of the server that we have to relog in again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up our register page and our register post. We're going to do some logging out. And then lastly, we're just going to handle hiding and showing different parts of the interface if you're logged in or not. So that's just to let you guys know what we're doing. So under auth.js, we've set up 1 and 2, and these are all done, so we can just not worry about those. But the easiest one, I don't know if you guys, we'll just leave the easiest one for the last, which is just logging out. But I'm going to do the render register form. Now, because our register form is pretty much the exact same as our login form, we're only going to have a username and password, and then you click register. I'm going to render the exact same file. So I'm going to do router.get at /register, and that will do request response, res.render, login, which is probably not a good thing to call that file, but we'll just keep it login for now, and then we can change it after the fact. But what I am going to do is give it a value of button text is going to be called register. And then in our login up here, I'm going to do button text is login. As well as, no, that should be good for now. I'm not going to bother with the H1. So in our login.pug file, so we have 2 different routes that are rendering the exact same file that's passing a different variable. So in our pug file, I'm going to end up rendering button text. So now if I go from here, this is the login form. If I go to /register, this now gets replaced with register. And I'll just do this because it actually is kind of bugging me for some reason. Button text, which is no longer also descriptive of what it is. So register form, login form. But it's using the exact same form. Now, something that is handy to do in HTML is, I'm sure that they showed you in your first HTML class and you've gone over in your future classes, is there's a method property and then there is it put? I think it's put, I can't remember. In the form that says which route that you're going to submit this form to. Because we're rendering the same file from two different routes, we don't want to hard code where our form is going to submit to. If you don't put anything in that, it will submit it to the exact same route that you're currently on. So we can end up using this form. If we're on the register page, it will submit to the register page. And if we're on the login page, it will submit to the login page. So without making any changes, we can already handle that. The only thing that we need to do is create the handle register form submission. So this one is probably the worst one that we're going to do. It has two different parts to it. So the first part is that we obviously need to take the form that is submitted for registering and register that user. We also want to make sure that that user does not exist, but that is handled already in that middleware that we used, or the plugin, the Passport Local Mongoose. But what we also have to do is, upon registering that user, we also have to then authenticate that user. So as soon as we create the account, we then set up their session at the same time, so that way you don't register and then immediately log in. I hate sites that end up making you do that. It is super frustrating. So we're going to do router.post at /register. And the first thing that we need to do is, I believe it's user.register. You know, instead of trying to go off my memory, I'm just going to go to the documentation that's right here. So we have Passport Local Mongoose. No, okay. I'll use this documentation. So .register, no. Okay, sorry, there we go. It is at the bottom of Passport Local Mongoose, which, as you can see me jumping around between these different documentations, this is part of the annoying part of development, unfortunately, is trying to figure out which resource is the best resource to look at. I'm sure, like, Vlad, when you were at Smash Reality, you know, for like Unreal documentation, you're like, oh, no, this article's crap, this article's crap. And you're like, oh, this one's kind of good, and it kind of goes with this one. So you kind of like combine them. Doesn't always work out, though.
I remember I spent like 2 days just searching stuff.
Yeah, you're literally like Googling for like an entire day, and you're like, why is someone paying me to do this? And then you go, oh, because like my mom can't even work her phone. So like, how is she supposed to set up Mongoose? Like, so at the bottom, we have this user.register where it takes in a username, and then it also has this active false. We are just going to not put that in. So I'm just going to copy this right here. And we'll change it up a little bit. So actually, you know what? I'm just going to take the code from yesterday rather than taking this like kind of crappy thing. And then I will explain it. Okay. So, like every other route that we've done with Mongoose, let's just simplify this a little bit. So we do router.register. This is going to be similar to like our model.create, or like a new user, new, what is it called that we did last week? New project. But what register does is make sure that we're not going to create a user that already exists in our database. So we end up doing user.register, and we give it the request body username that is coming from our register form, and then we pass it the password as well. So this password that's right here is going to be in plain text, but when it goes through our register thing, it will automatically hash it all for us, so we don't have to handle that at all. Then it ends up having a callback of function error account. So if there is an error, we console log error, and we go back to the register page saying that it's passing a variable called account. So we'll probably, we could put in a message saying that, that this account already exists. Otherwise, we end up authenticating local and then redirecting back to the login page. So that is really it. Just to explain this part to you though. So when we did passport authenticate up top, we only did passport authenticate local and then we gave it options. In this case, we end up actually passing it the request and response object so that way it can access our request body username and request body password as a part of the function that is run. That is automatically handled up here in the way that we're calling it, whereas down here we have to manually pass it those values. So that is pretty much it. I will put this up for you guys so you can just copy it. Register post push. So now if I go to /register and let's do a completely new username. So debomb and password is 123. If I click register, that's cool. User is not defined. Good start. Oh, I'm not requiring it in. Sorry. In order to register that user, we have to require in our model from our model folder. So / models user. And if I refresh, actually, I'll just keep that open for a second so you can see it.
Chris,
Mm-hmm.
can you just remind me how just /, /, and // differs from each other?
So what the differences are?
Yeah, like just remind me.
Okay. So if we do /, so it comes into how like the terminal works. So right now you can see that I am in a directory. And if I typed in cd, which stands for change directory, and I used a period, that ends up being the current directory that I'm in. So dot you can kind of think as not like it's in the local folder that you're currently in, meaning like right here. If I do .. it means go back a directory. So I can end up going back a directory, and now it goes from being COMP2068 whatever to just the Tuesday folder, which is up one. If I type in / and then went back to that comp, it will then go into that directory. So what we end up saying is our auth file is under a folder called routes. So in order to get to our models folder, we have to go to the common ancestor between those two. So we go routes, I want to go back to this folder right here. So .. to go back a directory. I then go into the models folder and then into the users file. So that's what the difference between .. / and anything else.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Now, and I think there was a question about this before. We don't actually have to specify the node modules folder when we are importing anything from node modules. It automatically knows to look into that folder. Did that answer your question, by the way, Vlad?
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know where I was going. So let's just like refresh. This will automatically resubmit the form because there was an error. So now I'm authenticated and that user exists. So if I actually show you guys what is in Mongo Atlas, I wish Mongo Atlas would like actually keep me logged in. I don't like that I have to re-log in every single time. If I bump that up, go into my collection, we have our users. You can see that we have our username test123, username example, username Chris, username test1234, and then here's the user that we just created here down at the bottom that's called debomb. It has a salt, and then you'll also see that it has this hash. The hash is the password, and it is quite ginormous. So you can pretty much guarantee that someone obviously, like, so does anyone here know how like encryption or hashing ends up working? I kind of like do, like I could probably explain it in like an oversimplified thing that pretty much makes it wrong. But there's two types of ways of, I'm going to put encrypting in quotes because they're different things, but there's two different ways that you can malform text when you're storing it. So there is encryption, which has the ability, it's a predictable algorithm that will end up taking one text and converting it into the other. And the way that you end up undoing that is you just do the same process in reverse, which is called decryption. However, when it comes to hashing, what it ends up doing is it's a one-way process, which can be a little bit confusing to explain because, I mean, both of them end up using some sort of algorithm. So you should figure like, well, if I use a hashing algorithm to hash it, can I just do that algorithm backwards to get the same thing? And the answer is yes, but no. Some hashing algorithms you can do it backwards and have been like cracked. But the thing is a hash typically, it's predictable, but sometimes you can have two different passwords that produce the exact same hash. And that's why there's sometimes no guarantee of what a hash will end up being. So there can be collisions. In more modern things, there aren't as many collisions. But we also end up using a salt that ends up changing, it uses a series of text to generate a different type of password. So it's not the same algorithm every single time. So you can see that the hashes here, or sorry, the salts are different between every single user. So it uses that salt to generate the hash. So the reason why we do that is just so that way if someone were to ever compromise our database, as we said, like each user is different, so they're not able to undo that. Whereas with decryption, if they have like your private password, then you're kind of like done for. Like that's pretty much game over. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry, I sometimes go on side tangents. I apologize. The other thing that we need to do in our application is we also just need to have a log out functionality in our app, which is the easiest one to do except for the rendering of the forms. So we're going to have router dot, it's just going to be a get request at /logout, and this will have request response. And here is where it's a little bit different than probably what you're used to. So if in normal cases, because our session exists at request.session, most people typically think that they can just do like request.session is null, and then you're good to go. But that is not always true, and the reason for that is in our case right now, that would work. We've just destroyed the session. But when we start getting into larger applications, like, and obviously there's a big difference between the application that we build and say something at Google, but when you're working on an application that is across multiple services, your session does not exist only on that server. It's existing on many servers simultaneously. So if you just end up saying request.session is null, what that would end up doing is it would kill that session on that server, but there's no guarantee that the next time that you make a request is to the same server. So, and the other reason why we end up doing it is because we can start storing our sessions under, like we could hook it up to MongoDB, you could hook it up to like MySQL, Redis, there's tons of different services that you could use for your session management. And what it does is it allows the author to kill that session in whatever way is appropriate for that session management. So what we end up doing is we do request.session.destroy, and that will have a error that comes back potentially. And if there, is it just, I think it's just error. Sorry, one sec. I'm just checking under express session documentation dot destroy. Yep, it only comes back with an error. And really, I don't really care if there's an error anyway. So I'm just going to redirect back to the login page. Always. So if it destroys it or doesn't destroy it, I'm just going to redirect to the login page. Makes my life a little bit easier. What you could probably do is end up, if there is for some reason an error, you don't want to like display an error message to the user saying, sorry, we failed at being able to log you out. Usually you would have this connected to some sort of like service. So that way you can start logging going like, hey, we're getting errors as users are trying to log out, like what's going on with that? So we'll just redirect to /login. So right now I have no authentication. I log in with example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm authenticated. I go to /login, or try to go to /login. I'm not /login. Still authenticated. Register, same thing, still authenticated. I go to /logout, and now it converts it to false. So we've destroyed our session and redirected back to the login form. So I am now going to work on getting rid of this ugly thing and just putting in a nav bar that gives us some helpful links. So I'm going to go to Bootstrap, documentation, documentation, components, nav bar, copy the nav bar, HTML to shade, copy paste, and I'm going to create a partials folder. So under my views, I'm going to create partials. I'm going to create nav.pug. So this will just be COMP2068. We'll get rid of all of this. And then I'll just have one more thing that'll be another UL. And this will be li, this stuff. Remove active. So I'm going to have /login. I'm going to have, whoops, login, logout, and register. And I'll get rid of that form because I don't need it. The only other thing is I want this to be a /, get rid of that, and I don't care about the active class. So now to include this nav.pug into my layout, I'm just going to remove this line that's right here from my H1 and just do include partials /nav. So if I refresh, you can see I have my nav bar up here, home page. Oh, I did not include the text for that. So login, logout, and register. So I have login, logout, and register. And obviously, we only want to display the ones that are relevant to their current status. So if they are, the only time that we want to display logout is if they are not logged in. So I'm going to actually put these so that the relevant ones are beside each other. Usually you have like register and login beside each other. So I'll say if is authenticated, then I want both register and login to be rendered on the page. And then I can just do an else and have our logout. So right now we're logged in. If I log out, oh, I have that backwards, sorry. If, let me just swap these around. So if we're authenticated, we want to show logout. If we are not authenticated, then we want to show register and login. So login, example 1, 2, 3, or example 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now it shows logout. We're at our home page, click logout, and then it redirects us back to our login page.
Can you push it up?
Hmm?
Can you push it up?
Yep. So the only other thing that we're going to go over tonight is we're now going to require authentication on specific routes. And there's different ways that we can go about doing this. So if we go from our projects that we had done last week, I'll throw this just into the nav as well. So we have our projects folder, and we have assignment 1, math, all 3 parts, test, and title example. So this was the stuff that we had done last week. So what I'll do is I'll make it so that I can still see certain parts of our application, but not do everything. So the one thing that I could do, which you might think would be easiest to do. Let me throw this all in a container just so it makes it easier to see. Is I could just end up hiding this create project button if you're not authenticated. So what's actually really cool with Pug, one thing that I find kind of annoying with if statements is sometimes you want to check if something is not true. So you want to do an if statement of the opposite. So usually you'll do like if not is authenticated, which I find is a little bit sometimes harder to read. It's always good to check like the positive than it is to check the negative. But what Pug lets you do is you can say, you can use unless, which is the opposite of if. So you can say unless is authenticated, do H1. So you can think of unless is authenticated as being the equivalent of basically like an else statement of the opposite. So you can say like if is authenticated, else not authenticated. So I'll throw that, oops, sorry, not that one. I want to do it on the create projects. So now, why is that still there? Unless is authenticated. Oh no, I just want that to be an if statement. If authenticated. But it's good to show you that unless thing. So, but the thing is that link that was right here would just bring us to projects/create. So while we've ended up making it harder for a user, what's going on here? Oh, sorry, we did /new. Yes, we did /new. So while we've made it harder for the user to be able to create a new project, if they already know what the URL link is, then they're still able to get access to that URL. So what we can do is on the server side, we can end up using that is authenticated for checking, for obviously checking if they're logged in or not, but we can also have a requirement of them being logged in to access that area. So inside of our projects file from last week, I'm going to create, oh, sorry, hold on. Maybe not in projects. How did we, yes, in our index.js, because we have all of our code down here. So I'm going to create a function that's called require auth, and that will take request, response, Oop. So there's only two real parts to this. Is if they're authenticated, then we'll let them continue. If they are not authenticated, then we want to redirect them to the login page. So require auth if request.is authenticated, return next. That means that they are authenticated, they're good to go. Otherwise, we want to return res.redirect to /login. So there are several different ways that we can end up using this require auth. What we could do is individually put it on the routes that we want to protect. So we could say at this get new, so this is rendering the create form for a new project. I could just put in require auth like that. Still will not let me go to it. So I can end up protecting specific pages that I want. In this case, it would be the new route. So if I were to use like Postman and do a post request, I would still be able to create a new project. So if I wanted to put it on that one, I would then protect it as well. Editing, of course, I want to protect that. In this one, it's a post request. I want to protect that. So most of these I probably want to protect. The only ones that I don't want to protect is this one right here, projects and projects ID. So in order to do that, I could do, well, again, I could just throw this on every single one, but that's a little bit annoying. But what I can do very easily is I can make sure that I protect every single post route. And in order to do that, I can just say router.post, and I do a wildcard. So I say everything that is a post route, I want to require auth. So that means everything, again, everything that is a post request will be required auth, and then it will just drop down to the next available route. I can also do this application wide as well. I can use this require auth inside of my app.js and protect every single post request in every single route if that was what I wanted to do. Obviously, you don't want to do that because it will affect your login page and it will also affect your register page, but you could end up registering this middleware after that login, which is why we separated our auth.js into a separate file. The other thing that we could do is currently based off of the structure, it makes it a little bit harder to do. We just want to make sure that we register it after, let's see. No, these are GET requests, so that should be fine. So I can actually move these up. So I'll put it right here. The only thing that I have to make sure is after this project's new is this ID here. So I'll have to protect this one manually. And then after these two, I can then just do router.all and just say require auth. Or I could also use, there's all, or I could just use router.use. So now if I try to go to edit project, that also doesn't work. If I try to delete a project, it goes back to the login page. But I can still go between these two pages. So let me throw this right here. So I'm going to throw a comment. So protect all post routes protect new project from unauthed users. Require auth on every route below this router. So that's what's happening here, is we protect all the posts, which in this case, like now that we've set it up in this way, this router.post is actually kind of redundant because we do not have any post requests before getting to this one. But I'll just keep this up here just as an example that you can refer back to. But yeah, besides that, you can see how there's like a couple different ways that you can end up protecting a route. You can also use multiple middlewares if you want. So you can end up saying like, I want to require authentication on all of these routes, but then you could set up an additional middleware that would say be for administrator users, going like all of these routes both require you to be an administrator and be authenticated. So there's no, I don't think there's any like real maximum of the amount of middlewares that you can run on a single route. But this is how you would end up implementing it for just requiring authentication. Again, usually inside of your app.js, what's pretty common, and this is the most common way of doing it, is in our app.uses right here, we would end up setting up every single route that is able to be accessed before authentication. So we would make sure that users can log in, users can register, users can log out, users can view public content, all that sort of stuff. We set that all up first. And then we require authentication for everything else as like a catch-all. The only thing that we would also want to make sure when we handle it is that we still are able to access our 404 page. That's the only other thing. So with that, that is the end of class. Does anyone have any questions thus far about like authentication? Or does anyone have any issues that they want me to try to go over? Okay.
Just general build.
Sorry?
Just general build, problem with that.
Yeah, I'll throw it on GitHub. No problem. All right, so it is up there. So without realizing, again, as you guys already know, I did not know that next week is reading week. So please do not forget that assignment 1, part 2 is due the Monday of your reading week, like the only Monday of your reading week. You could always try to get it done sooner. I had a couple of students who didn't realize what the requirements for part 1 versus part 2 were, who have already finished part 2. So if you just spend probably a couple hours, just make, like, even if you take this application that we just did today that already has Bootstrap implemented, you should be able to pretty quickly start creating your like projects and services pages and stuff like that.
What should be in the services pages?
So services pages could be like for example, like I have projects that I've worked on, but services could be like I offer web development, I offer like PC building, stuff like that. So those would be like services that you offer. So it could be like database maintenance or just web development, and it could even be like specific web development. Like I offer PHP services, I offer NodeJS development, I offer this development. So you can just make stuff up. It doesn't actually have to be representative of what you offer as a service. Mm-hmm. But those are like the kind of things that would be quite common.
Okay.
So turn the lights on.
So then that rubric then includes assignment 1, part 2?
Yes. So everything that is in it is technically, like, that file is for assignment 1. The only thing that was for part 1 is like the cloud, the 4 GitHub commits using Express Generator, just because that's like a requirement for all of the assignments.
That's basically everything that, or that's basically what we do every class, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Chris, so part 1 and 2 are in the same file?
Sorry?
Part 1 and 2 are in the same file? In the same
Correct. Yes. I will create a new submission link. Though. Are you already all done? Yeah. Okay. So, like I said, I've had numerous people that already said, "Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm already done." So, that's good. You don't have any homework now.
So do you want 2 repositories for parts 1 and 2?
Nope. Same repository is
Okay.
totally fine.
Good.
No, I'm not a weirdo.
Okay.
First, can you share